So here's the story of how one squad of Centurions can do 47 mortal wounds to any vehicle of your choosing for a princely investment of 3 CP per turn. I imagine Knights players are not going to be happy. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where we're focusing on more Imperial Fists today. Namely, we're looking at what we can do with the new Imperial Fists book in combination with their vigilus formation from Vigilus Defiant, the Imperial Fists Siegebreaker Cohort. And I wasn't exaggerating at the start of the video. We're going to look at how an average squad of 6 Centurions with all the bolters does an average of 47 wounds with just 3 command points invested per turn and just 1 character standing nearby. So what is the Siegebreaker Cohort? It's essentially one of the formations that you can buy in from Vigilus Defiant. If you have an Imperial Fists keyword detachment in your army, which I believe would include Successors and Crimson Fists to my knowledge, as they also bear the keyword, then as part of writing your army list before you turn up to a game, you can pay 1 command point to make the detachment a Siegebreaker Cohort, and this gives the Siegebreaker Cohort keywords to any captains, Centurions, Dreadnoughts, and Vindicators in that detachment. Now, paying this command point allows you access to 4 other options. There's the Warlord trait Indomitable, the Eye of Hypnoth Relic, the Structural Demolition Stratagem, and the Seismic Devastation Stratagem, which is the really important one. We'll quickly cover the other bits first. The Warlord trait Indomitable applies when the Warlord does not move, and Imperial Fists infantry units within 6 inches gain the benefit of cover and automatically pass morale tests. Now, I'm not sure if this Warlord trait still legally applies to 40k now, because there has been another Warlord trait called Indomitable in the new Imperial Fists book, and it has completely different rules. I strongly suspect that we're soon going to see an FAQ to remove this one from the game, as it doesn't really make sense to have 2 traits with Indomitable with 2 different rules. So I wouldn't run this in the meantime, as I believe the usual practice for updated rules is that if there's something of the same name that receives new rules, then the new rules trump the old rules, so I'd personally leave this alone for now. Next we have the Relic, which is the Eye of Hypnoth, which has also been moved into the main Imperial Fists book. This gives reroll of 1s to any Imperial Fist unit that's shooting within 6 inches of the bearer, so it's essentially like having a lieutenant around for the purposes of shooting. So this has been flatly upgraded in that it now applies to all Imperial Fists units, and you don't have to buy in the specialist detachment to access it. Again, I expect this to get removed with an FAQ shortly, as it has essentially already received upgraded rules in the new Imperial Fists book. So that brings us to the stratagems. First we have Structural Demolition. This is a really very poor and situational stratagem for 1 CP. Essentially, it means that when you destroy a building, if there were any enemy units embarked within it, you roll 2d6 for each enemy model embarked inside the unit, and for each roll of 1, 1 model is slain. So it essentially kills a few more models when you kill a building with enemy units inside it. Not many people use buildings, and this is very specific, and it's not always going to be worth that 1 CP. So again, this is probably one to forget about. But now we're onto the really good one that is slightly setting the internet and many vehicles on fire at the moment. Seismic Devastation costs 1 command point. You pick a Siegebreaker Cohort unit from your army. Each time you roll a wound roll of 6+ for an attack made by that unit that targets an enemy vehicle or building that phase, the attack inflicts a mortal wound in addition to its normal damage. Now on most units, this doesn't really seem like that much. Certainly if you fire, say, a Vindicator from this detachment, or a Dreadnought with an assault cannon at a vehicle or building, you might be getting 1 extra mortal wound at most. But this detachment contains Centurions, and Centurions get a lot of shots. So the unit we're going to use to exploit this to the absolute maximum is Devastate Centurions equipped with 2 heavy bolters and a hurricane bolter. Each of these models costs 70 points each, so a full unit of 6 is 420 points. We're going to park them next to a captain that we've upgraded to a chapter master and given that Eye of Hypnoth relic from the new codex. So in pre-game setup for this little formation, we have spent 2 CP making a captain a chapter master, 1 CP buying in the detachment, and 1 CP on using the Eye of Hypnoth. That unit of 6 Devastated Centurions gets 108 shots per turn when all of its guns are in range. So that's 72 Hurricane Bolter shots and 36 Heavy Bolter shots. Now with the Chapter Master rerolls, 8 out of every 9 of those will hit, so that's 96 hits, but 1 out of every 4 of those hits will generate an extra shot from their Imperial Fists. Bolter rule where they get an extra hit for every roll of a 6, so that actually equates to 120 hits, or more hits than they have shots. Now if you use the Tank Hunters and Seismic Devastation stratagems, Tank Hunters gives you +1 to wound against a certain vehicle, and Seismic Devastation gives you mortal wounds on a roll of 6 up. Then you get 40 rolls of 5 or 6, so 40 mortal wounds, and after you've factored in the Lieutenant's rerolls, that becomes 47. Now this is massive overkill against virtually any unit in the entire game, and you're not even taking into account the actual damage caused by the heavy bolters and bolters themselves, which, just if you're interested, is roughly another 20 wounds on an Imperial Knight due to the Sons of Dawn boosted heavy doctrine, which I'm assuming that you'll be in if you're running this combo. So all in all, 67 wounds on any one vehicle, with a 3-up save and 5-up invul. That will basically delete any vehicle in a normal game of Warhammer 40k. And honestly, you could afford to split your firepower around a bit when you have that amount of ludicrous killing power. Provided you're using the Tank Hunter stratagem, the Hurricane Bolters alone should kill a Knight. You can afford to fire all of those damage 2 heavy bolters at, say, a second Knight, or into some other vehicles, or some infantry. You can take this combo even further, say if you put a Chaplain on them with +1 to wound against the closest unit, which I personally wouldn't typically do, because odds are the big threatening vehicle that you're trying to kill isn't usually going to be the closest, particularly when these guys are quite slow moving as it goes. Should you really want to get all of the bolter hits, then you can also activate the Bolter Drill stratagem for an extra 2 CP, which gives you an extra hit every time you roll a 6 to hit, so that'll be stacking on an extra 25 damage output to the unit. In all honesty, I'm not sure whether this is really worth it at this point, because you've probably already overkilled everything that you need to, and you might well just be worth saving those extra 2 CP to use Seismic Devastation on the next turn, or using it for other purposes. But if you are splitting fire like crazy and want to gain every single iota of damage out of this unit, then it certainly could be worth it. Bear in mind though, at this stage you're spending 5 CP for each turn of activating all of this craziness, and you've already spent 4 CP in the setup, so you're not going to have a whole ton left. I think that in competitive Imperial Fists armies, at least until Games Workshop changes or updates this Seismic Devastation stratagem, we'll be seeing a lot of these Centurions with the heavy bolters and the Hurricane bolters. These units are kind of great against everything, because they have easily enough shots to deal with most hordes, and they're also incredibly nasty against vehicles, even when you don't have Seismic Devastation active due to all of those heavy bolters being damaged too against vehicles. Their biggest weakness in general is that they aren't the toughest unit ever for their points, but when you have strats like Transhuman Physiology or Bolstered Defences, they can get to enormously high saving throws, and even heavy weapons are going to bounce off them if they're wounding on no better than 4s. Essentially, Heavy Bolter and Hurricane Bolter Centurions are just a bit of a tool that you can pour all of your command points into and will reward you with enormous damage and decent survivability. Their main weakness is range. 36 inches with only 4 inches movement is certainly not guaranteed to always be in range of the targets that you need them to be. Also, they'll struggle with any units that are hiding out of line of sight, so they're quite good to combo with things like Whirlwinds or Thunderfire Cannons to take out all the targets that they can't see. They're also somewhat vulnerable to being tagged in close combat, though of course they can use the stratagem to turn all of their bolter weapons into pistols for a turn, and absolutely hose whatever tags them, but this will stop them from shooting all of that horrendous firepower at the enemy army. Overall, I think they're a very scary competitive unit, and I certainly think that we'll be seeing plenty of them in tournaments to come. To be honest, even if Games Workshop does remove this formation from the game, they're still going to be a strong unit. But at present, against vehicles, the Siegebreaker Cohort just absolutely turns them up into crazy little murder machines that will kill any vehicle that they have range on. Please let me know if I've missed anything, or you think I've made any rules mistakes here. It can sometimes be a bit clunky with keywords and things when Games Workshop updates a faction compared with rules that they've already had that aren't entirely invalidated, so I'd definitely like to hear your opinions if I've missed anything. Also, if anyone happens to have used these guys yet, then I'd really like to hear about it. Thanks for listening to Auspex Tactics. Subscribe for more videos like this, covering interesting things that are happening in the game of 40k. And I'll see you guys in the next video.